come once again to discuss things.
Okay, let's go ahead and start the show. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Geeky Gentlemen here on Geeky Gentlemen History Month, where we are discussing the history of geeky gentlemen and their contributions that have been overlooked by a biased educational system, except not at all. I am Sid Partu. Joining me today is Steve Baxey and Ozzy Griffin, and yes, I'm going to use that joke every damn time, so you better think it's funny now, because I'm going to keep going.
And as we all know, if you don't get a joke at first, just beat it over your head until you get it.
Obviously, it gets funnier every time, of course.
Clearly.
Yeah, clearly. That's the first rule of humor. If people don't laugh, keep repeating it until they do.
Blame it on the microphone, whatever it takes.
Yep. So anyway, we are kicking off Geeky Gentleman History Month with our first full episode. We did our Steve and I did a mini on Over the Garden Wall, so you can tell this is very loose on what exactly history means, and that's cool. That's the way I wanted to play it. So we're getting into History Month right now, and this should be interesting. So Steve, what are we talking about in our first full episode of Geeky Gentleman History Month?
So we're talking about whether or not history academically actually matters. Everyone always hears the saying, history always repeats itself. Those that don't learn from history are doomed to repeat it, yada, yada, yada. And we're talking about whether or not that's the case. Is there areas where lack of historical perspective is a good thing? And is it necessary to be driven into your mind for every possible subject?
Yeah, and I don't know if there's ever a case where lack of historical knowledge is a good thing, but I'm willing to make the case, and this will sound weird from a guy that likes history so much that he's devoted a month to it on his channel. I would be willing to make the case where lack of historical knowledge on a subject doesn't matter. That you don't know the history of a subject is not important to being good or proficient, at least, at that subject. And my go-to example for this, because I thought really hard about this all week, Steve, my go-to example is going to be computer programming. Okay. And let me start out with a simple question. If I were to say your computer has a bug, what would it mean to you?
That's got a glitch?
Yeah, something's wrong with it, it's not working right. The reasoning behind that term is back when computers were, big switchboards and all that stuff. A woman who was operating one, and here's another factoid within the factoid, the guy that really pushed this particular method of programming and hardware and everything thought only women would be good enough to work the switchboards and because they were the only ones logical enough. So a woman that was working one of the switchboards noticed the switch wasn't firing correctly, so she goes to the server, pulls it out, and finds a dead bug actually smushed into the drive. So we have the term, the system has a bug in it. And do you know how useful that information is in programming a computer? Not at all.
Yeah.
So that's my really poignant example. I gave you two historical factoids about computer programming, and they do not help you know how to code whatsoever. And they're certainly important. They give you some background and some information about computer programming history, but they do not assist you in doing it whatsoever. So that it's an interesting thing, and I don't fully agree with the argument. I think it's very much a case-by-case basis, but I do think there are certainly fields where lack of historical knowledge is completely unimportant.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It is kind of a case-by-case basis, and I've got another example to use. I always bring this up whenever we talk about anything that has to do with experience, anything about what's the word? Empiricism, basically. The movie Good Will Hunting. In that movie, they make reference to a mathematician that Matt Damon's character is sort of based on. And he's this Indian guy that had no formal education whatsoever. He has no knowledge of the basics or the history or the theories behind how math works. And yet he pushed the field ahead several decades. Simply by knowing how his brain naturally works. The whole idea of a child prodigy, you don't have to know how a piano works or where it comes from to still be good at playing it.
All right. Just because this is what History Month is for, I get to just interject with little like anecdotes. So Mozart is going into a theater and some guy stops him and says, Herr Mozart, do you have any advice for me since I'm composing my first symphony? And Mozart tells him, a symphony is a very complicated piece of musical structure, and you should really start out with something smaller and less complicated. He goes, but Herr Mozart, you wrote your first symphony when you were 5, but I didn't ask for advice.
That's exactly it. And it's weird because other fields require it. Like we talked about this before, but I think it's tough to do any sort of concrete or well-developed philosophy without an understanding of where theories come from and who argued them and the context they were made in.
Yeah, and I mean, like, philosophy is an interesting beast because if you don't read enough of it, you'll find yourself more often than not just making someone else's argument and they've already done it better.
Exactly.
But at the same time, you're not ever going to be able to read every single thing in philosophy because philosophy is Freddy fucking Krueger, the nightmarish bastard child of 1,000 madmen.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's the villain from Virtuosity you're thinking of, but yeah, go on.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. I picked this because one of my professors, my economics professor, said that he doesn't care for history in any subject, but he thinks it's vital to economics. And I agree with half of that sentiment. Economics works best when you understand the history of economics. There's a theory in economics called learning by doing, and it's exactly what it sounds like. In the long run, average cost goes down because as a firm continues growing for years and years, and as they get better over time, they understand how to do business better.
Okay, see, like, I would actually disagree with that because the 2008 financial crisis was all predicated on, oh, well, the value of houses is always going to go up, and no one thought to ask, well, what happens if it goes down?
Well, remember, it went down because of the derivatives market, and that's a whole separate thing.
No, I'm just saying, like it went
That's
down.
That's one thing about economics. It's not a separate thing. It's all tied together.
Yeah, it got as bad as it was because no one had a contingency plan for if the value of housing goes down.
No, that's true, but I mean, the whole housing prices going down stuff, it's a whole separate issue that was not historically understood at all at that point.
Yeah, and I just think that's interesting because they, like, it's such an... It seems like it's a best case scenario where no one's really hedging their bets thing where they're like, okay, well, this has always gone up. It's obviously always going to continue to go up because, you know, like as Lex Luthor says, the one thing that they don't make any more of is land. So it's an interesting premise, but at the same time, well, what if some scenario happens, such as people not being able to pay off these toxic loans, and they just walk away from their houses? So, like, it's interesting because I think economics is you know, just blood magic.
It is. It's kind of voodoo.
You have
you know,
idea.
For that girl you took out to Spectre, you know what would have been a better date if you took her to sacrifice a goat?
I was going to say the Peanuts movie, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I just think that's a really good idea for a date, is sacrificing a goat.
I went to Wendy's afterwards, so there's some sacrifice involved there.
Yeah, sure. Anyway, so Ozzy, you haven't gotten much chance to talk. What are your general feelings on history's place in academics? And not just, you know, history as a subject on its own, but in other fields.
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I love me some history. I'm a humanities kind of guy. Like, I never went, don't get me wrong, I never did my education pass a Certificate 3 in Library and Information Sciences. However, as far as history goes, to me, it adds the importance of something. Well, let's go back to... Okay, I'm going to compare two disparate fields that have bugger all to do with each other, okay? Okay, take, for example, economics, and we're going to compare it to, fucking, I don't know, arc welding. Can you do good... Hey, I said nothing to do with each other. I was not kidding you. Anyway, arc welding. Can you do good arc welding without knowing where your arc welder comes from, where the metal comes from, or any of the history? And the answer is hell yes. It's a technical field. The technical aspects of things you can do without history. This goes with this because of these rules. It's learning rules and applying them. It is technology, technique put into action. However, when you're going to go with anything that involves human beings, that's when you need your history. Now, don't get me wrong. You guys,
Disagree.
We'll get to that in a second.
Disagree.
And
finish up your point, but I want to interject. Go ahead.
I've never seen Inception, but I friggin' love the movie Paprika. If anyone knows their anime, they know Paprika. And anytime I find that you're educating human beings about why something is important, a little bit of history ingrains it in the brain. That's why, ironically, the reason I knew that mathematician, even though I couldn't remember his name, you were talking about, a guy who most of his calculations and equations were dismissed because he didn't know to show his working out, to show that he was actually right, which he was. Booyah. But the reason I knew that is because the mathematics book that I had at school actually had this guy's story and several other famous mathematicians actually in there. Interesting point of information. My grandmother is actually was a switchboard operator at a small, like a modest-sized country town in Australia back in the back in the 50s. So there you go, a little bit of history right there. So okay, you disagree with me before.
Before we get too far away from it, though. Okay, so anything to quote you, anything that involves people, you need to know some history on. Disagree.
Okay.
Disagree. Medicine.
Okay.
Medicine.
When I say, to clarify, when I say involves people, I talking about how people respond, how they act, human responses to things. Not talking about basic biology or anything like that.
Well, no, it's just like I think medicine is and especially psychology. Then psychology in particular, because Freud is the grandfather of psychology. And every single thing the dude said was fucking wrong.
Not talking about...
even going back to biology then, everything Aristotle said about biology was wrong.
No, Steve, women are a birth defect caused by a lack of cosmic wind. Aristotle. And to be fair, though, he did get right that dolphins were mammals before anyone else.
This is true.
Who cares? So, anyway, but like Freud... Every single theory he had was wrong, but the important thing was it sounded good. And it still sounds good. I actually still really like Freud as metaphor for the workings of the brain, not as like, this is how it actually is. But no, like, because I can identify with that. Like, yeah, there are parts of me that just, fucking do what you want right now, and then there are parts of you that are like, no, you shouldn't do that, and then there are parts of you that are like, no, you can never do that. And then you got to balance out which one you're going to choose. So, like, I find that to be a good metaphor, but I know that's not how it's actually working in my head. So I don't know. Like, there's no reason really for a psychology student to study Freud's theories because they've been completely disproven or contradicted by actual evidence. You got to remember the way Freud wrote was.
Once again,
well, you got to remember that the way Freud wrote was pretty much, oh, well, because of these dreams, that proves my theory correct. Well, do you have any other evidence besides you saying you're right? Go ahead.
Like I said, you got to now to do a bit of rewinding. Now, this is a good example of where I think history is right. You don't look directly at the subject. Freud is what he is. But if you understand the psychology of the society at the time and the forces that led up to it, like I said, any time you're dealing with human-on-human interactions and human beings in general, if you have the history behind it, you understand the mindset going into it. This is why when you look at if you want to go meta on almost anything, you've got to understand the people that are doing what they're doing. So you see where I'm coming from there. Just making sure I'm not going in too weird a direction.
I feel like that's a bit of a different thing, though. I feel like the idea of history as context and as a study to where ideas come from is not the same thing as history being necessary for furthering knowledge. Because
I get that.
Because obviously it's very good to know the context under which Freud came up with his theories. The guy loved and read.
He was on cocaine.
Huh?
Yes, he did.
Lots of cocaine.
Yeah, lots of cocaine. He loved Nietzsche, stuff like that. And that's all good. That's all interesting. But that's all interesting from the inherent bias of you want to understand history, not in relation to whether or not you need historical perspective to understand a different subject.
Mm-hmm.
If that makes sense.
Like, on the converse here, though, I can think of examples where if you don't know the history behind it, your knowledge, you might be able to know some things, but you're not going to be as knowledgeable about a subject. Law. Law is a fantastic example.
Yeah, you're right. Everything about precedent.
Yeah, because you need to know precedent, you need to know cases. There's, I don't like that I have to cite fictional examples, but this is still a pretty good argument. In an episode of West Wing, one of the staff members, I think it was Tony, has a civilian guy that's been brought in to help determine what the White House is going to do on a case or whatever. He has the two sides are arguing with this guy about what he should do and what action he should take and recommend to the president. And Tony has him read a specific part of the Constitution about how voting will work. And the guy reads it, and the thing is, it's a black guy, and he's reading the modern interpretation of the Constitution, and Tony goes, now there's one problem with that there's one problem with that Constitution you're reading. That's a rewrite. The original wording said that every black person in the population will count as 3/5 of a person. And so the guy ended up siding with Tony's argument about whatever the fuck it was. That's a really good...
I remember that episode.
Yeah, that's a really good...
Yeah.
It helps that it's a real example in a fictional thing. That's a really good way to look at, law is a very important to understand the history of it, because you can't act like this has always been this way. There's a reason that the law was put into place this way. And so when you're arguing on either side of it, like if you're saying you're arguing to get someone acquitted or whatever, it's like, well, obviously the law is what it is, and here's why it was put into place, but here's how my client doesn't really apply fully to that law.
And to add to your point, and to add to about furthering knowledge, if you want to argue against precedent, it helps to have the context around what that precedent was set under.
Oh, Boston Legal did that all the time. It was fantastic.
Yeah, I mean, exactly. I mean, the whole idea of reversing decisions, getting appeals, improving laws, getting amendments passed, all comes from stating that previous history only functioned under a context that no longer exists.
Yeah, I mean, in Indiana, in Indiana, it's illegal to give a blowjob. Still is.
That's hilarious.
But, I don't think anyone's going to get arrested for that.
Who would file a charge? I'm just wondering.
Hey,
that girl gave me a blowjob.
We do have a very high population. Steve, we do have a very high population of Amish out here. No, but at the same time, if that was ever brought up, I could clearly see that law being struck down in the court. If it were brought on charges, like someone was really trying to peg someone for something, if that was brought to court, brought on charges, that law would probably be struck down if it were ever brought up in court. But there's stuff like that all over U.S. states. I believe in Washington, Seattle, it is illegal to be naked in public. Like in most cities, it is illegal to be naked in public unless you're wearing black socks.
That's hilarious.
It's not just socks; they have to be black socks, if I remember correctly. There's like a game of weird laws.
Sorry.
That's law is a really interesting thing to talk about with history, because I think that's something where you cannot possibly do it unless you have an understanding of history. So, like I was saying, I think it's really a case by case basis. Go ahead, Austin. You seem like you wanted to jump in.
No, I'm just imagining me just like, walking out stark naked except for my socks, and you're just like, looking good, Ozzy. I'm like, feeling good, Ian, and just walking right out the door.
There a breeze?
Oh yeah, but that's not the point. What I'm saying is, if you want to understand, okay, if you ever want to go meta on a subject, and this is, see, now you guys have kind of proved my point. Let's take metallurgy, for example. A subject that I know almost nothing about, but I enjoy the benefits of, like everyone else does. Metallurgy, you can think a certain number of ways, but if you want to advance a science, you have to look into why things are done the way they're done, why certain things are not done the way they're done, and you have to, and I use the term history a little bit loosely here, you have to understand your present history to see if there's a new angle you can bring to something. Because let's be honest, that's the trick to technology, and that is the trick to academic understanding. You have to incorporate different things into it to see if they produce different effects.
To that point, there's a great quote by Schopenhauer, because metallurgy is a science. By Schopenhauer, metallurgy is a science that was developed out of alchemy. And alchemy is of course the infamous, turn water into gold. And Schopenhauer once said, "The alchemists in their search for gold discovered many other things of greater value." And that's
one of the few.
That's really one of those things
that was actually usable.
There were always
There's another quote, I believe, by Wittgenstein, which was, "I will never hesitate to quote a bad author if the line is good."
There you go. That's fantastic.
No objection there. But actually to take you up on that one, alchemy, which believe it or not is a pet subject of mine. I learned about that when I was studying mystical arts and a few other things. Not kidding you.
I just dabbled in some alchemy back in college.
Yep, I did, but that's not the point.
I dabbled in Full Metal Alchemist, that's about it.
Silence. Anyway, what I was saying is, sorry, I've seen like 2 or 3 episodes of the show. It's not bad, but
it's a great show.
Go ahead with what you were saying, Ozzy.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. So, like I was saying, alchemy, believe it or not, it was a combination of metallurgy, psychology, and astrology. I'm not kidding you. Is all 3 of those things done at the same time? Most of it was the people who were doing it trying to keep their knowledge both hidden and yet still taught at the same time. All it takes is one. I'm trying to put this politely. All it takes is one non-respectable king to take control of the kingdom. And suddenly you think that giving this guy swords that are going to outlast everything else and maybe armor that's actually going to do its job a lot better than anyone else's might not be a good idea.
What's that called? It's hiding
a
code within Damascus Steel. I believe it's called Damascus Steel.
Oh, Damascus Steel. Beautiful stuff. Absolutely.
Yeah, there's that really famous myth around King Saladin and Richard the Lionheart, where Saladin asks Richard to show him the sharpness of his sword, and so he cuts a metal bar in half.
Nice.
Richard does, and then Saladin says, "You've shown me the strength of your arm, not the sharpness of your sword." And he takes a veil handkerchief thing that's really light, and throws it up in the air, and it's slowly starts to fall down. And he sticks his sword out, and it falls onto the blade, and then gets cut in half just by the action of falling, because there's even though there's no resistance, obviously. And that's there are a lot of stories about Damascus steel doing that kind of thing, and it was about how the steel was treated while it was in the forge and the chemicals that were added to it. And there's only a couple daggers left anymore that
the original ones, yeah.
Yeah, that were made that way, and the process of making it has been lost.
That's interesting.
No, you can if you look up a British of all people, a British guy called Russell Meeks, did a video on bushcrafting and how to take care of your knives. He actually did a video on how to actually forge a Damascus blade with the beautiful, what do you call it? With the beautiful rainbow colors on the blade. Looks fucking awesome.
Those are modern ideas about how it was done. Like the specific process that was used in ancient times is gone. Same with like the Greeks made. No, not Greek fire. The Greeks made their statues out of solid iron, unlike the Romans who always used solid bronze, unlike the Romans who used marble. And we don't know how the fuck they did it. Because like they're 8-foot statues that are one solid piece, and they didn't chisel them that way. They obviously cast them that way, and we have no idea, given the technology that they had then, or even the technology that we have now, how the fuck they accomplished that. Because it's fucking an 8-foot intricate statue. You can't just pour that and expect it to go on evenly.
Well,
so it's one of those things, like a lot of methods have been lost throughout history, and so it's interesting to see. And I'm not sure how much this really relates to the topic at hand, but it's interesting to see how that knowledge was lost. And like we as modern people in the modern area with our computers and our smartphones and our printers that don't fucking work, we think of ourselves as so like high and above. The lowly peasants and like savages of our past selves, but like I still don't know how the fuck to build a pyramid. Do you?
No, that's
like
a good point.
If aliens came and got me and were like, Ian, we want you to show us how they built pyramids, and since you're a modern man, you should obviously know how to do this. I'm like, I don't know. I think you like stack them in kind of a triangle. I would have no idea how to tell anyone to do that.
To be absolutely fair, the pyramid project lists one in ancient Egypt, because the ones in Mexico, they're nice. But no, the ancient Egyptian pyramids were like and this is, once again, I'm paraphrasing my housemate when he described it. He said they were like the NASA of their day. Like, that was like literally the best minds from the Hellenistic world and any place else they could get them working on these structures.
Yeah.
And they were, and if you think they look impressive now, just remember they used to be covered with friggin' limestone. So,
and there was one with the big one, Khufu's, had a gold top on it, and fucking Rome, man.
To be Khufu's. They never actually verified that one, and there's quite a lot of evidence to say that was dodgy, but it doesn't matter. Look, the Great Pyramid of Giza, used to have a gold capstone. Yeah, you can probably imagine that didn't last very long once the empire that put it up there crumbled or needed the money.
Yeah, I mean, let's use this as an opportunity to jump back to the topic at hand, because like this is all really interesting stuff.
But kind of getting.
What are you going to do with? Like all it does, I feel at times that all history does is help you sound really smart, without actually contributing anything.
Yeah, I mean that's the tricky part, because I love history too. I love reading up about how things were done and where stuff came from and what the contemporaries of that era were, the people that they don't teach you in American schools. But it's not really useful. I mean, it's fun in conversation, but it doesn't really. It goes back to your computer example. If I'm trying to code something, it doesn't fucking matter how they did it 20 years ago.
Yeah, and then like so many processes change that it's like it would certainly be useful if more information was left for us. Then like you gotta also think that people didn't really pass on information the way they do now. Like once you found a way to do something that was a unique innovation, you kept it to yourself so you could be the most productive one. Like I remember there was a book that they made us read in middle school. It was called something about Little Tree. It was about a kid who was half Native American, half white, and it was like his life story, and it was actual first-hand accounts, history kind of stuff. And he talked about sowing the fields with his grandfather for corn that they would turn into whiskey, because it's like late 19th century. He talks about that in the book, and he's like, Grandpa and I found a way. We figured we were the only ones who found a way to sow a field, or reap a field rather, without breaking our backs. And like let's say that they're not doing anything that unique or whatever. Let's just say that. But the mentality is the important part. The idea of we found a way to do it, and we're not going to share it because this way we can be more productive. We can do more in our bootlegging operation or whatever. It's like you don't share this information because then you're not the greatest one.
Yeah,
and like that's a really unique thing now is that we've come to a point where we share information and it's getting, to the point where we overshare information because I don't need to see what your fucking smiley face pancake looks like on Twitter, people.
Hashtag OMFG, I am brilliant. Hashtag
Hashtag life hack. That doesn't seem like much of a life hack. It just seems like you put the eggs on front of the pancake and then made the bacon curve. That's a really interesting modern take. Like that we've gotten to the point where we're sharing information with each other, and you still have trade secrets and everything, but it's much more specific than it used to be.
It just to once again to go back to what I was saying about alchemy. I mean, the trick to concealing the information from the unworthy, that's why, in a way, that's why they used to conceal things in stories, and they used to be oddly specific about the details. There's, I'm not going to raise this particular hellstorm of an argument in the comments section because of the people who get responding. Trust me, there are some people even you don't want in the comment section, but
no one watches this show.
Yeah, good point. Screw it, why not? Okay, you take the Bible or any other number of religious texts, there's really, really, really oddly specific things when the point for a spiritual reason or for a philosophical reason would have been adequately conveyed by saying, and lo, I beheld the stars in the sky. As opposed to, there's exactly this many stars and there's exactly this many angels, and they're arrayed in these patterns. Hint, hint. You clearly get, and anyone who's studied geometry or mathematics or astrology or astronomy even, will basically get that, hey, this corresponds to that, and when you overlay it with this, it also corresponds with this. It makes a couple of predictions you'll start making.
You can certainly overdo that, but there is a certain level of code in a lot of ancient texts because they just had to figure out to get around censors. And a lot of censors, it's like, okay, I don't fucking care about this stupid religion, and they just flip through it and okay, whatever, 7 angels, blah, blah, blah. Whatever, hail Satan. Hey, wait, what?
Exactly my point, and that's what I mean, because there's certain. Now, don't get me wrong. There are certain types of how do I put it? There are certain regions of people's brains that, from person to person, respond differently. Some people learn stuff, by visual stuff. Some people learn stuff by hearing stuff. Some people learn stuff by stories and emotional associations. Mm-hmm. So, from my point of view, and this will get into it, and this is kind of changing the direction a bit, I know, but in addition to hiding the information as opposed to sharing it like we do these days a lot more, for as good and bad as that is, there's also the case of impressing on people a way to remember it, like it's part of a fun story. It's kind of like what Jonathan Colton did with his song The Mandelbrot Set. He turned the Mandelbrot Set into a song, and it's a freaking good one, so good suggestion for a bit of music to use on the show. But it's the case of whatever works to impress it on the mind of the person you're trying to educate. If you think that they're worth the effort, you use it.
Okay.
So as far as history, so another aspect of history in academia is relating it to the individual, and the individual who wants to see that relation or uses that to remember it. Hey, whatever, use it as a song, use it as a story, a ballad, a saga, whatever it is. That's a way to remember it.
Okay, Steve, that is related, but I want to get back to the actual importance and value of knowing something just for the sake of knowing it. Historical anecdotes are the best thing ever.
Yeah.
But like, what value do they have outside of now I sound really smart? Like there's that famous one of Churchill, and he's like drunk at a party, and some woman comes up to him and goes, "Mr. Churchill, I do believe you are drunk." He goes, "Very true, madam. But in the morning I will be sober, and you will still be ugly."
Burn.
I'm sorry, I never heard that. That's hilarious.
Oh, Winston Churchill, like
I've heard some variations on it.
it's actually one of my favorite Family Guy jokes. Is that it was one of the Stewie and Brian time travel episodes, and they go back to World War II, and they're like, "Oh look, there's Winston Churchill. Maybe we'll hear some of his famous wit." And they do the setup for that, where it's like, "You are drunk," and he goes, "And you, madam, are a bitch." And Stewie's like, "Wow, history really whittles it down to the gems, huh?" One of my favorite Family Guy jokes, because it plays up on that. It's like, "Oh, Winston Churchill was a really witty guy." I'm like, no, we probably just remember his like best ones.
Dude, my housemate's brother is a funny guy, but like I said, to quote my housemate, I've only ever heard his A material. His B material, I've heard like one or two bits of like, yeah, okay, fair point.
No, but like, so what value do you think history has just on its own? Well, not on its own. What value do you think history has if an argument could be made that knowing history for every subject in one way or another is going to come in handy? Do you think there is an argument for that, Steve?
See, I spent the whole week trying to think of one.
Yeah.
Because I really want to. I love history. It's so much fun. I really want it to be the crux of all knowledge, and I don't think it is. Because it's like what you were mentioning earlier. We didn't keep track of history the way we do now. We had progress without looking to the past, without needing to look to the past. I think it can very easily become a crutch. But I think the best thing I could come up with, the best idea I got as far as history mattering in all subjects of academia, is that it gives you context for what you're trying to accomplish. Like whether you're coding something, or you're a doctor, or you're a scientist, or a philosopher, I think having historical perspective gives you at least a sense of what the traditional ways to attack a problem are, so you can be different.
Yeah, and like that's kind of where I'm sitting on it too. Is I'm sure you've heard this, but I've heard people like Dawkins and Tyson and everyone mention it when people ask them how they know so many things about space or whatever. They usually will say something to the effect of we have the benefit of standing on the shoulders of giants. And I think that's why if I am going to make any kind of argument that history, no matter what, is important, it's good to know what's come first, because otherwise you wouldn't be where you are now in a field.
Yeah.
Not necessarily. I'm sure there are fields that we can think of where we've actually lost a couple steps, but at the same time, that is really still important in a very general sense. Because, I mean, if you just start from scratch every single time, then you're not going to be getting anywhere. If you go, okay, I don't need to know any of the history of computer coding, I'm just going to open up my computer and start up DOS, and I'll figure it all out on my own. No, you need some of the context for where you're getting this information from. I just don't think it's as important in some fields, like programming.
I'm kind of breaking it. I kind of break it down to three things. I mean, the technology is the how, the application is the what, but history is the why. You've got to figure out, why it is. This is what I was saying before about metallurgy. Why it is that you do things, and why it is that you prohibit or deny some others. There's, as you mentioned, with law and human interactions, there are some very, very, very good reasons to just say this is a stupid idea because or someone else tried that and this is what happened to them.
Mm-hmm.
And don't get me wrong, I know I'm retouching on a point I went over before. But, if you, like you said, you take computer programming. Computer programming, if you understand, why didn't someone go into this? Well, it was like you take, okay, let's dial the clock back to the 1960s or 70s, before the Clone Wars. We've just lost Steve.
It's cool. We're still recording. He'll be back, I'm sure.
Awesome. Okay, so you dial the clock back to before the Clone Wars. There he is.
Just keep going. You're fine.
When IBM was doing its lines of coding, they used to pay their employees per line of code. So this was in the 80s. Microsoft, who was subcontracted to them, just took one look at their pay structure and said, dude, we can do these same programs with way less lines of code, but where's the incentive? They knew the why. IBM assumed that competent software was predicated on more code. Microsoft looked at the why relative to their technique. It's not about just having one thing. It's about exponentially increasing the yield of both by taking competent labor or a competent mind to apply it, and then giving it context.
Hello?
Because when you finally say, well, there you are.
Sorry.
Okay.
I got kicked
So
out.
like I was saying.
Go ahead, Ozzy. Finish your point. Yeah, like having the competency to know where you're going and what you're working on, so you're not working on the wrong things. I feel is important because, like my example earlier was medical science. Okay, once again, fictional example, but I do still think it works. So, in one episode of Star Trek Next Generation, Dr. Crusher is overseeing the medical bay, and like they don't have use of their amazing magical futuristic technology. So a guy is trying to, like a doctor apparently, or at least a future nurse, is trying to like help this guy with a broken arm. He's like, well, I don't have a whatchamagigget. And she says, well, just make a splint. And he goes, a what? A splint. To put the arm next to something straight, set the bone, and then wrap it. It's like, it's a basic technique. He's like, I didn't learn that in school. And I'm just like, well, It seems like some things you should still be teaching, even if they are completely out of date in medicine, because there's a history of it. You don't know that you're always going to have the most modern techniques. But at the same time, medicine is such a complicated field because it's always evolving. There's a really great episode of Scrubs that dealt with that. And Scrubs, the most realistic show about medicine and hospital life ever put on television, mind you.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, the most realistic show, though, not going to lie. Scrubs had an entire episode about, like, an old doctor and Dr. Kelso, who, like, Kelso goes to, like, apparently spends all of his weekends going to medical conferences to keep up with all these new doctors who are getting out of med school, learning all these new techniques. And that's why he's a real hard-ass, because he has no free time. Whereas this other guy is, like, a really, really nice old man doctor, but he's still using methods from, like, 20, 30 years ago, and they're very dangerous and completely out of date at this point. And that's a real thing that happens with doctors. You know, people, like, always go, oh, I don't want to be treated by a kid. Well, that kid knows more than any old doctor you're going to get in. The kid who just got out of med school and just got his doctorate a year ago is 10 times more prepared to take care of you in an efficient way than your family doctor who's been operating in private practice for 40 years. And that is crazy. Yeah. It's like it's this really weird balance of, well, you trust experience? Do you trust knowledge of the way things have been done? Or do you trust innovation? Because innovation exists for a reason, but where does the balance lie there?
Point. I actually, funnily enough, you're bringing me to the same point I was coming to, which is where's the balance lie? Now, Steve, Ian, just a quick question for both of you. I only went to TAFE, okay, so I was trained to be a library technician. What about you guys? Because this is going to be important in what I'm going to say next. Steve, Ian, where did your educations go to?
I just graduated from college as I got my undergrad degree about 6-7 months ago now.
Okay, cool.
In philosophy, in general studies, but I'm gonna say fuck it. I got a philosophy degree without the language part.
Fair enough. Okay. I have no idea what a language part has to do with philosophy, but yeah, I'll roll
Learning
with it. Okay.
a foreign language. My college required 2 years of a foreign language, and I just have no capacity for that in my brain. How about you, Steve?
I'm almost done with my undergrad economics degree and undergrad philosophy degree, and I'm also working on a master's of ethics and applied philosophy.
Nice.
Okay, so the balance, and I'll actually give academia, when done right, this is good. When there's the balance at most academic institutions is that, yes, like, especially when it comes to theoretical mathematics and physics, the balance is very much on, we're pushing boundaries, we're coming up with, M theory, there's no actual agreed on.
And I really think they're just really high and making stuff up at points, because I have no idea how you prove the kind of shit that they say mathematically.
Yeah, well, like I said, it's complicated. You wouldn't understand. Anyway,
Yeah.
Anyway,
like, that bothers me. It's like, hey, not that I'm religious or anything, but it bothers me when like, there is no God. Okay, well, why does the universe work? Because of math. I'm like, that's a little bothersome. Can I see the math? You can, but you'd never understand it. Well, then this is not okay. I'm skeptical.
Anyway,
they just take LSD, write shit on the chalkboard, and it looks really complicated.
Okay, but what I'm saying here is most academic institutions have someone older, hopefully wiser, and more experienced teaching the subject. When I was at I was in an Institute of Technical and Further Education, TAFE for short, in Australia. And my Institute of TAFE had people who had experience as library technicians and as librarians, and as people who shelved books, done their, they'd worked their way up. And now they were passing on the skills, they were studying the new stuff, they knew what had been done in the past, and they usually gave us a very balanced view on what was, what they thought was good practice. They didn't just say, oh, you can ignore that. Very rarely. But if they were going to say that, they'd tell us why. And I respected those people. Right up until they told us, oh yeah, all those jobs we said were waiting after you graduate, yeah, they're drying up at the moment. That was exactly the point where I dropped out.
Well, that's the funny thing, though, is, like, everyone goes to school to get a better job, and so you, like, try to look around at the market as you enter school about, like, what jobs are really needed, and then you go and you get that degree, and by the time you've got that degree, all those jobs are taken.
It's always the
everyone did the same thing. Yeah, it's like a mathematical thing. Anyway, exactly. but that's now, to steer it back to steer the good ship ADD back into Riddle and Bay. This is getting to my point. Sometimes when you have one person who's teaching you the techniques, okay, that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But they don't have any context. They don't have any history of it. They don't say, no, it just works, man. Like, they aren't saying, oh, this worked because, or I have seen this, applied in these situations, or this works better in these situations. For almost any job or task you can think of, theoretical, practical, doesn't matter. There's usually one or two different techniques. And
no, I see what you're getting at. If you ask a question, I'm like I mean, it's the constant, math teacher question. When the fuck am I ever going to use this? And they have no real-life example. Like, what's the joke on the internet? Like, jobs that actually require you to use algebra every day. Algebra teacher. That's it. And
that's the thing. No, that's not totally fair. I used algebra in a lot of jobs.
Let me make one point here. Like, when you ask a math teacher that question, they're so, like... They're, what is it, right brain that's supposed to be logical and everything, They're so stuck in that method of thinking that they don't really have much grounding in humanities very often, and so they can't really point to an example where the use of algebra was actually a practical matter, and that's why you get really weird fucking, like, story questions in math, and, like, my favorite one ever was, John had 37 candy bars. He ate 25. What does John have? Diabetes. John has diabetes. It's one of those things where, like, when you lack any ability to ground things in a historical or relatable human context, your subject lacks any relatability. So, yeah, I mean, I think, this wasn't an argument that I thought of. My best argument was standing on the shoulders of giants. But, yeah, if you're not able to relate history to something that, or you're not able to relate your subject to something that matters to people, then your subject is going to be alienated. And I think history is a good way to do that.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Krakatoa, loudest volcano that has ever gone off, sent so much ash up into the atmosphere, and so this is something that you usually learn about in geology class, end of the 19th century, sent so much ash up into the atmosphere that year did not, technically speaking, have a summer. Like, it was just dark, and the weather was bad all year round because, not as much sunlight was getting into getting through the atmosphere and stuff. So that was called the year without a summer. You know what was written during that quote-unquote summer? Any guesses?
No.
Late 19th century, Gothic.
Wasn't Jane Austen alive back then?
No, or maybe, but
no,
not what was written. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
Oh,
that was written during the year without a summer. And so, like, even if you're not a big horror fan or anything, Frankenstein. So when you can relate, like, that to the geologic event of a volcano that went off over 100 years ago, that becomes more interesting and more memorable. I'm not going to guarantee you're going to remember those two connections now, but it's more likely to stick now, I think.
Yeah, I can see that.
Interesting.
It all goes back to that primal human function of needing to tell stories. Because memory is not it doesn't go back. Memory is not what people think it is. Memory is not a perfect recollection. Every time you try to remember something, you're reconstructing it. So no matter what, you're always trying to tell a story. And I guess history serves that same function of, you can never perfectly remember exactly what you learned, but you put it in simpler terms, and you use anecdotes and use analogies, and history gives that the connection between the layman and the expert.
Yeah, what was it? Okay, forgive me, but I have to do it. So on an episode of Boy Meets World...
I love that.
It wasn't bad.
Yeah. On an episode of Boy Meets World, Mr. Feeney has a conversation with one of the kids, and he's like, I wanted to stay up one night and hear the president give a speech on the radio about, like, I think it was why we were going into World War II, and my father wouldn't let me. And not because he didn't want me to hear the speech, but because he didn't want me staying up with his poker friends over while they were drinking and smoking. And, like, the reason he gave me, however, was that he wanted me to be well rested for school next morning. And I wasn't happy about it, but I respected my father, and I went to bed that night. And the next morning, I went to school, and I remember being well rested and alert and able to learn that day. And do you know what I learned that day? And he goes, what? I have absolutely no idea. I have no recollection of what I learned, but I remember that I was ready to. And so, like, that's the interesting thing, is when you try to remember things, you're not always going to remember, especially with school, you're not going to remember what you learned on this specific date. That's just not how your brain works. Not every day is a light bulb moment. Like, you hear that talk about light bulb moments of, where were you on 9/11 or when Kennedy was shot or whatever. And like, you can, when you first found out about that, you will always remember the exact spot you were at. I mean, for most people at least.
Oh, I remember 9/11. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's one of those weird things. Like, regardless of your feelings on the event or whatever, you remember where you were when you first heard about that. So yeah, Steve, you're really right. When you're trying to place a memory, though, I think history does help ground things and help expand a subject.
Yeah.
So
It's
Yeah.
if I can play devil's advocate for a second.
sure.
The downside, however, like for all the talk I've done about, history is really important, mate. Yeah, it's really, it's heaps important. For all the talking I've done about that, the other side of it is, if you communicate, and you can see this if you study, if you go a bit, if you go a bit anthropological and you study tribes and their stories, one of the really important things that you'd see with storytelling traditions is you've got two options. One, the story as it's told and retold over the generations will carry connotations that neither enhance your knowledge of the information.
Every time the story is told, it's a different story.
Yeah, or it's just marginally changed, and that's done for any number of
the story changes
personal
every
reasons.
time it's told. Exactly. Yeah.
Or
That's why we have Homer, is because everyone considered it so perfect that it actually needed to be written down so it wouldn't keep changing.
Yeah.
And I don't know what that. Maybe it was better before they wrote it down or something, but goddamn.
Or you have the other side of it, which is that you learn it by rote, as in, and there's a lot of native Australian tribes that do this with their sacred stories. They will literally memorize them word for word. If you do not get them right, start right back at the beginning with one of the elders cracking you over the ear and saying, "Get it right this time." And I'm not exaggerating. There's a lot of tribes and peoples that actually do that.
Yeah, and I'm
So-
sure that's how most oral traditions have survived, but still.
A lot of them, yeah.
So Steve, do you feel like we've made a good argument or a good enough argument for that? Yeah, history is actually important. So there.
Yeah, I think we made a good argument. I think we appealed to the basic reasons the best. Like there's no complex abstract theory here. There's just a practical application of, if you want to explain anything, history is a good place to start. And I think that works. I feel like with a lot of this stuff, when it comes to justification of any kind, people have the tendency to overcomplicate issues.
Yeah, because that was kind of my joke. All that I was thinking in my head all week was, is learn from history or you are doomed to repeat it. Is that just like the history teacher version of math teachers? You use math every day.
Yeah.
Hey, a bit.
Well, is it though?
It's
when
not.
you think about it.
Really
Have you
not.
ever had an opportunity to stop someone from being like a Hitler rise to power? Has your knowledge about how Hitler rose to power ever come in handy? Because I can't think of a time that it has.
Well, here's the only
No,
example I guess, because we mentioned economics
Yeah.
earlier. If you look at the history
Yes.
of financial crisis all the way from Tulip Mania to 2008, the exact same trigger warnings keep going up. And the exact same causes and trigger warnings keep coming up because no one has any idea how to fucking fix them. Or they don't act on it fast enough. Now, we've gotten better at it. And we know kind of where to target now. So I think at least in that respect, history does constantly repeat itself. But that's also just because economics is a vicious cycle anyway. So
I beg to differ because
economics
there's an old
is
saying.
really magic because in magic you always have to give something up to get what you want and there's that rule of
sacrifice.
rule of 3, whatever you do is going to come back to haunt you 3 times worse.
but that's
Totally.
kind of how it works.
Yeah.
I mean, if you go to any self-respecting economic professor, they will explain the market to you as a regulated Ponzi scheme. That's basically what it is.
And it's not and here's the screwed up thing about economics. That's not the worst system to have. It really isn't.
It's pretty bad though.
But no, yeah, it is pretty bad. But no,
It's
what?
something you just came up with. Of course it's bad.
No. To be fair, we've come up with some pretty funny ideas here on this podcast. But I was just going to say, no, there's an old saying that builds on the history doomed to repeat thing. History doesn't repeat, but it sure as hell rhymes. And that's kind of where I go with Steve's example on the Glass-Steagall Act and the 2008 economic crash, which was preceded once again by and was predicted by the cultists over at the LaRouche Institute and a couple of other right-wing guys, because they basically just got in there and said, look, okay, we've tried to put in laws to try and keep this from happening, and to a certain extent, they worked. Now, anyone who saw the economic crashes from the bottom of the harbour schemes from 2000, sorry, not say 2000, false habit, from the 1980s, will tell you that it wasn't perfect, and it didn't stop a lot of people losing their jobs, so they weren't losing their houses either.
That's one of the interesting things about the 2008 financial crisis is if you didn't have a lot of investments, if you were really just a borderline person that really wasn't investing in their retirement and stuff, you were actually doing fairly well in the financial crisis. And so you could have gone through that entire thing and, I don't know if you, blacked out all media and most conversations people had. You could have probably gotten through the financial crisis without realizing there was a financial crisis back in 2008, even though it was the worst one since the Great Depression.
Anyone investing in hard assets, what do you call it, fucking, gold coins.
People lost everything. I don't want to diminish that. People lost a lot of things. People lost their entire lives in the 2008 financial crisis, but it was nowhere near as bad as the Great Depression, because we learned from that and we put in things to prevent things from getting that bad again.
Yeah, I mean, we've got barriers and stuff that keep it working, and obviously nothing was perfect. It didn't fix the problem, but it could have been 100 times worse. Easily.
Yeah, it's the difference. It's the difference between like blowing a tire out on the highway and having a spare, or blowing a tire out on the highway and having to hitchhike and then getting picked up by the Texas Chainsaw Massacre people, and then you pull a gun out of your vagina and commit suicide. There's a clear.
Like people talk about TARP being a dirty word, and the bailout and AIG and all that, and then all that stuff gets a bad rep, and they say that we didn't do enough. But no, that stuff actually saved us from wrecking the entire world.
Right?
Yes.
That's not debatable. That's how that worked. People hated it, but it worked.
Yeah, and I mean, like my dad was like a big time opponent of it, because he was all like, well, listen, if you have all the power, do you agree that power corrupts? Do you agree that absolute power corrupts? Absolutely. So how are you comfortable with the government having all the power? I'm like, because they're at least trying to help.
I mean, it helps that we have the Federal Reserve, which is not tied to politics as much.
Yeah, certainly. It's just one of those things where it's like, yes, it's a sticky situation, but the alternative at the moment is worse. And things could get bad because of decisions that we made back in 2008, but you can't expect history to provide you a way to predict the future. You can just expect it to provide you a way to keep yourself from making the same mistakes again. Hopefully.
Yeah.
I'll put it...
It's a nice, not a map. It's a nice legend, I guess. If I'm going to use a geography example.
It's good advice.
Yeah, actually.
I guess.
Yeah, a legend. Yeah, good call on that one. A legend on a map is a very, very good way to describe history, because you know what signs to look for. And you know what things to look out for. And to be absolutely fair, as long as the overall context, not even that, as long as people are familiar with the trappings of a historical event brewing up, people do know how to get around it. I mean, the reason, a good example of that, and let's get into the philosophy. Yeah, no, I don't want to do that. Sorry, just stop. Once again, I just stopped. No, I was going to say the philosophy of government. I'm like, no, Aussie, not going back there. No. Long story short, no. But what I'm saying here is, as long as as long as people know where the trappings are, and this is a limitation of the human brain, I'm afraid, but as long as people know what the trappings of something are, we know exactly how to call out shit that we've seen before. We live in supposedly free countries with democratic processes. And we have those democratic processes because, and I will give them their absolute due for this one, because the guys who wrote up the Declaration of Independence and the American Constitution, which I call the sports model of constitutions, it really is just stripped down and bloody effective for what it does, just said, look, we know that if these things are infringed upon, our right to assemble, our right to worship, our right to have a well-organized people's militia to keep ourselves safe, if any of these things are stripped from us, we know we're gonna include account of the following problems, and we know any one of these could, break up our country or basically just screw us all over in a really painful way for the long run. So
yeah,
we're standing in the legacy of that.
Yeah, and I think it's important to talk about the difference between, particularly with the militia example, because I think it's important to talk about the difference between infringing upon rights and just being reasonable about how far those rights should extend to, because that's the that's the NRA's big thing is, we have the right to bear arms. It says so right in the Constitution. Yes, you have the right to bear arms, but you have the right to bear arms, but that was for the explicit example of defending yourself from being overrun and blah blah blah. And it's and that's not a threat right now, and it's not going to be a threat in the foreseeable future. So putting regulations on that is an acceptable thing. And so the context there does help extraordinarily.
I'm going to find a picture of bear cavalry. I'm going to put it in the chat.
Okay. Anyway, it's one of those things where because people like to cherry pick history, and I don't think that's okay to do. And I fully say that knowing I'm a hypocrite because I do it all the fucking time. People like to cherry pick history to make their points to the point where you'll have, oh my god, I'm trying to think of a really good example, and nothing's coming to me right now. Can anyone think of a cherry-picked moment of history that completely contradicts the context of the time? Anyone got anything off the top of their head?
What, something that contradicts fucking the U.S. Declaration of Independence, that sort of thing?
No, just like a cherry-picking of history, so-and-so said this. All right, here we go. Everyone likes to quote, the beginning of the Constitution to say that America is a Judeo-Christian nation. The Constitution says we are endowed by our Creator with unalienable rights in reference to God. Thing is, Thomas Jefferson fucking wrote that. We're talking about the guy that took scissors to the Bible to remove
Jefferson
all
Bible,
the
and a good book at that.
Yeah, he took scissors to the Bible to remove all the mystic parts about Jesus. It's one of those things where you don't get to cherry pick your goddamn history. But everyone fucking does it.
But everyone, look, if I can give you a good example, I'm sorry I didn't remember this first. A good example of science that needed a bit of history. And this is the Russian Academy of Sciences under communism, okay? So it's not the most respected of institutions at that point. Does okay these days, but back then, no. Anyway, the Russian Academy of Sciences had this one bloke who said that nature practiced communism, and that if you plant crops really close together, they'll equitably share the resources, as opposed to the plants just saying, crap, we're running out of plant matter and nutrients in the soil. So, let's just try and, get whatever you can get your tentacles on. And basically half the crop's dying. So, that's, like I said, that's a good example of someone who had little context and a lot of philosophy overriding everyone else who knew better. This goes back to what I was saying about where most institutions balance. their practical applications and their history with their known and accepted technique.
I think it's important to mention that history and the sciences aren't really alone in that. Like, everyone does that in their field. People always want to, like, relate their field to, like, how important and fundamental it is. And, like, my favorite example, because I actually had someone say this to me, is like, no, mathematics is very important because, like, the golden ratio, for example, there's a flower that grows according to the golden ratio. I'm like, no, fuck you. The flower just does its thing, and you apply your understanding of some shit you made up in your head with numbers that don't exist in nature to the fucking flower.
Yep.
The flower doesn't have shit to do with the golden ratio. You're just fucking crazy, and you're like making connections that aren't really there and just happen to line up. It's like that shitty movie, The Number 23.
Oh god, I hate that movie.
It's a piece of crap.
It's hilarious to riff though.
Wasn't that Jim Carrey in that movie?
Yes. Oh my god, it's like, I'm a serious actor. I'm like, Jim, I believe you, but god, don't pick something this bad. No, but like that kind of thing is certainly the case in every field, and history just seems to have it in spades. And like John Oliver actually just did a really great exclusive video for the web when he was talking about his book that was coming out, full of historical, not true facts. It was things that like he made up that sounded like historical facts, but were actually complete fiction. And he goes through like this 5-minute video where he talks about how all of these things are lies and stuff. And then at the end of the video he goes, and this book doesn't actually exist. And so like
nice.
History really has that where people just don't like to fact check, but they like to hear things that sound good, so they will believe things. And it's like you get the same things with quotations, because there's that really funny one that's like floating around with the problem with reading quotations on the internet is you can't really be sure that the person credited is the one who said it - Abraham Lincoln. And you get people that have a lot of fun with that shit, because like for a while there, this is really funny. For a while there were a bunch of pictures of Taylor Swift with quotations put over her, and they were like, and they were all like sigged with Taylor Swift after the quotation. But the thing is, they weren't her words; they were Hitler quotations. And people like Taylor Swift fans were reblogging them and all that shit because they thought they were really clever. And then, of course, the internet being the amazing thing that it is, people started making Hitler pictures with Taylor Swift quotes, but were quoted Adolf Hitler.
Nice.
So,
I love the internet.
like, the internet is a snake eating its own tail while tweeting about it.
I like that.
I like it because it's a riff on a series of tubes as well. Anyway, no, but like that's the interesting thing about history is it's much harder to verify because it's not math. It doesn't, someone can't tell you, 2 + 2 = 4. It's not language where you can look up if it's, a word is spelled right or someone's using correct grammar. For history, you actually have to do research into whether or not something is the case. And sometimes you can just look up something, you can Google, did Napoleon get defeated at Waterloo? And you'll probably get a yes. Actually, here, let's run this example right now. Did Napoleon get defeated at Waterloo? And let's see, what does Google say? No, it doesn't just give me a yes or no answer. God damn it, Google. But you can do that with certain historical things. What?
Try Ask Jeeves.
Fuck it, whatever. No, like you can do that with certain historical things, like who was the first president? Someone told me George Washington. You should be able to find really quick without much reading George Washington. But when you try to look up more obscure things like, did Constantinople really fall because someone left a fucking door open? then it gets a little gray, and you have to actually do research. And it's like, well, yes and no. It was pretty much already doomed to fail anyway. It just happened at the one time. Blah, blah, blah. Like it's gray, and history isn't as black and white as we'd like it to be. So when you're trying to apply it to academics, it's a little messier. But it's still important, I feel.
Well, this is why I mentioned it before, that, when it comes to history, unless you can do the archaeology thing where you go for your primary, secondary, and tertiary sources of information, first-hand accounts, second-hand accounts, after that it just gets too blurry.
Mm-hmm.
That's
Steve,
why...
Steve, you throw in. Ozzy has been talking too much. Steve.
Sorry, man. Sorry, yeah.
No, it's cool. I was just enjoying the conversation there. No, Ian, I'm tending to agree with you more and more when we go through this. As for the out of context example, because I was trying to think of a couple of those as we were here, and I think a lot of times it's just history getting misconstrued, like Columbus discovering America and such. And it's interesting that you can have a really bad. If you break down an example and it works for what you're trying to explain, but it's not necessarily true. Does that ever happen to you guys?
Oh yeah.
Like
I think I know what you mean.
Like you make a reference and the reference doesn't actually hold to anything, but the point you're trying to make is still valid.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's also part of the importance of history and teaching other subjects, is that it doesn't have to always work. It's just a matter of the point you're trying to get across.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly helps. It's better when it does work, though, right?
Yeah, it's certainly better, but the effect is not necessarily lost just because the example isn't right.
Yeah, I mean, like with the Columbus things, everyone's taught, well, Columbus sailed to prove that the world was round, and he accidentally discovered America in doing so. And it's like, no, everyone fucking knew the Earth was round, but the lesson of teaching kids that just because people are saying, hey, you're wrong about this, doesn't mean that everybody's right. That is an important lesson to teach kids. There's a better way to do it without glorifying, a genocidal jackass. But the lesson itself is still valid. It would just be better if they used an actual example.
Yeah.
I prefer when they use an example that actually holds water, because then when you discover the lie, it can be very problematic. And it conflicts with the lesson that you learn, because while the lesson may still be valid, it makes you question it again, and that's kind of counter to what you're trying to do in the first place.
Which goes back on the other side of the argument, which is one of the reasons why, especially for the technical fields, you don't want a history lesson complicating or wasting time. You're just like, this is how it works, this is an example of it working, go do your homework,
Mm-hmm.
So, once again, we could get into a whole argument about whether homework actually has any valid points whatsoever as a teaching method, but that's a whole different thing.
That just depends on the kind of homework in the class and such. That's really
But
valid.
by the time I got out of high school, I did not believe that if my teacher... I really got to the point where if my teacher doesn't have time to say it, there's no value to it whatsoever.
I feel like with math, it's really hard to just go to 2-3 lectures a week and then still keep up with it without doing some kind of homework.
Nah, fair enough. I'm being a little facetious with that, and I'm kind of picking and choosing my subjects. But at the same time, teachers teach what you need to know for the test, and it very rarely comes down to the homework questions.
Yeah, I mean, it's really relative to just who you're talking about, what subject it is, and such. Yeah,
certainly. So we started this by talking. I'm actually really happy, Steve, that we managed to find a value to history, because that's the thing, is you kind of take that for granted that history is important, but I rarely do hear people talk about it, and we started this video by being really unsure of that, and we almost I was really scared that, because I've decided the title for this video is going to be, does history have academic merit? And I was really scared the answer was going to be no.
And I mean, it seems like it's pretty clear yes now.
Yeah, it was very close though.
I'm with you on that one. We've really gone over both sides, and we've given fair arguments to both.
Yeah, and so I think it's interesting that we started out this episode mainly talking about the ways in which it's not valid, or it's not as important, certainly. I'm trying to think of if there's a field where it is absolutely useless to know the history. Not just not important, but completely, like, is actually detrimental if you know the history of what you're doing.
Yeah, detrimental. That's actually a bit of a stretch.
Yeah,
Actually,
think of where it's
you know,
just completely useless.
The only times I've ever seen history be detrimental to something is when a really good idea, like, say, learning about germ warfare or ways to combat germ warfare, came from a really fucked up source, like the Manchurian experiments the Japanese carried out in World War II. Like, you know, you're like, okay, fucking... That is, you know, it was some fucked up shit that went down. And if you hear anyone referring to it in anything other than condemnation in Japan, congratulations, you found the equivalent of Japanese, white nationalists.
Yeah.
So, yeah, they're equivalent of them. But yeah, when people get so hung up on, oh, that was awful, oh, I can't believe you're even thinking about that, that's the only time when it gets detrimental.
Kind of tough.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think if there is a point, because, like, my argument wasn't that it wasn't important or wasn't useful at all in anything. My argument was it's less useful in certain fields, and I think Ozzy really did nail it. With technical fields, it's not as valuable as with, you know, like, humanities fields. But I'm trying to think if there's a subject or something where it is actually bad if you know the history of it. And
I can only say, well, interestingly, I go back to your original example with, what was the guy's name? The philosophers, the Greek guys who said that, who were writing medical textbooks, and saying that pus, saying that pus was a sign that the body was healing, when actually it's desperately trying its last shot to push out an infection from inside it.
Yeah. Medical science is like, because, I mean, there's a lot of things that are really bad, but you know it's bad and you know why it's bad by learning the history about it. There is that really good scene in Star Trek The Voyage Home where Bones gets to go to a, 1980s hospital, and he talks about it like he's in the Spanish Inquisition.
Oh, that's right. He goes, yeah, why don't you just drill a hole into her head to let the demons out while you're at it?
Yeah, it's really fucking funny.
And he just passes one and goes, look, you go, what are you in here for? It's like liver trouble or something. He goes like, bloody savages. Gives her a pill and goes, take one of these, call me in the morning. And like, 10 minutes later in the movie, they're like walking past her and she's just fine. Like, that's it.
Yeah, it's a complete recovery. That is the best scene in that movie.
Funny.
Yeah, you get Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, which is like the action movie, Star Trek III, The Search for Spock, which is like a weird nature documentary, and then you got Star Trek IV, which is a comedy. And they're a trilogy somehow.
Perfect.
Anyway, so, like, things were knowing that, like, because it would have to be something where if you know what went on behind it, you're actually, setting yourself up so you're not able to learn things new about it. So I'm trying to think of...
I mean, the best example I can think of, at least of that as a thought experiment, is like Plato's Republic and the whole idea of a noble lie. Like, it's detrimental to know how things actually are because this lie helps society function.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's...
So I guess economics?
Yeah, I could see that.
Because you know how fucked it is... Like, when you really start to... And I might say that you shouldn't learn anything about economics.
It just depends on what you're doing with it.
Yeah, but, like, once you learn, like, too much about it, you're like, holy shit, this is complete fucking bullshit. And this is just people sacrificing goats to the invisible hand of the free market.
I mean, the moment you realize the implications of perfect competition, you realize how fucked everything is.
Right?
Because you cannot have art in perfect competition.
What was Shakespeare's, Plato's was no artists, right?
Yeah, no artists. He banned specific instruments and such, although he didn't necessarily believe that because on his deathbed he asked for a flute.
Yeah, he didn't believe that it was necessary for him in his time period, but for his ideal of a perfect society, there was no art because it compelled you to think higher.
Yeah, I mean,
Shit, what's the movie? What's the movie with Christian Bale?
The Prestige.
Psycho.
No, not Prestige, not American Psycho. Fuck, Sean Bean's in it. Shit, fuck, shit.
Christian Bale.
Equilibrium.
Equilibrium.
Oh
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, that's the society where they've banned art because it makes people think too highly and it makes them unsatisfied with their lives.
Okay.
And it is, it's so weirdly good. It shouldn't be good because it's such a low budget. It should have been an absolute piece of crap Matrix ripoff, but it's like a billion times better than the Matrix. And they got guys in motorcycle helmets and leather trench coats that look like fucking SWAT teams.
Isn't that the same guy that did the Total Recall remake?
I don't know.
I think so.
But yes, like that's a really good example of when you know the history behind certain things and you realize how much of it is not hard or not like grounded enough. You're like, holy shit, this is really fucking dangerous, and we should all be afraid.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what. My final input on this conversation, because I do realize that you guys have stuff to do, and we have been going at this for almost 1 hour 50 minutes. Is that it's a good, and not going to name names here, but there was a guy I suggested roping in on this discussion, and quite rightly, given the context of what we're doing, Ian shot me down on this one. Now, because this guy had a lot of baggage. Now, what he was is a history teacher, but basically he was a good example, and Ian brought this up to me just unequivocally, unambiguously, just said, no, not this guy, because.
Which actually, you know what? Fucking don't even tell him. I'll just read the conversation.
Well, basically, he said no. That's a
no. I just want to like read this.
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Okay, hold on.
The short version is it's not always the history either. It's the way it's presented and who's presenting it. Because
okay. So like Ozzy sends me the link to the guy's channel because I'm like, yeah, let me check out his stuff. And I go, I'll look him up in a few. And Ozzy goes, yay, I'm almost useful. And like 10 minutes later, I respond, this guy's an idiot. Like that was just the only response I could have. And like I just keep going. I'm like, this guy, he is not allowed to come on. Just fucking wow. Yeah, I'm glad I checked this dude out off the wall. Sorry, man, but I'm just be face palming the whole time. Like, he did a rant about ending mandatory public education, and he was a teacher. What the fuck?
Yep, and like I said, that's one of the reasons why, one, I'm not naming names, because I still get on reasonably well with this individual. Hopefully he doesn't hear this podcast. Anyway, second thing is, he's...
I hope he hears this podcast, because you, sir, are a fucking moron.
Anyway.
There is a problem with our public school system, and it's motherfuckers like you working there.
Sorry. Never thought I'd hear that used in context, but there we are. So I was just going to say that was my point. Sometimes the person who's teaching history isn't always the best person to have teaching that exact history.
I mean, it is really awkward. I think hold on, just give me 1 sec to review in my head.
Yep.
Alright, in my public school life, I was never taught about slavery from a black teacher.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, like, it's not like, they wouldn't have if we had a black teacher at the school or whatever time, but every time I took a history class, I was never taught about history from a black teacher. The closest I ever got, did you guys at schools do, like, a student-teacher thing where, like, someone that was going to college to get their degree got to, like, come in and teach a class or whatever?
Yeah, periodically. That's how I learned about the Cold War in middle school, I think.
Yeah, like, for one of those times I was taught a little bit about, the slave era of American history by a black student teacher. And that's, oddly enough, that's the guy who I learned about Obama from, and that was when I was in middle school. And so, like, when Obama started running in my, senior year of high school, senior year of high school, when Obama started running, my mom was like, I've never heard of this guy. I'm like, I have.
Yeah, I've heard about him. He was starting to get up steam back in Oh, jeez. About 2011?
It would have been like 0506 when I first heard about it.
2001, yeah.
No, it's one of those interesting things where, like, I when you think about that, it's weird that I was never taught about, like, I mean, we had guest speakers and we went to museums and stuff, but never as, like, someone who was there in my life every day while I was going to school, and the person I was learning history from, never was I taught by a black person about slavery. And that's a weird thing. I think that would be really obvious.
Yeah, and this is good example of a bad teacher, good subject. Good subject, social privilege and how you factor into it. Bad teacher.
Bad teacher, red pillar.
No, who the hell's red pillar?
No, a red pillar. Someone on the red pill.
Yeah, well, this woman, ironically, not quite a red pill guy, but someone who once again, a little controversial, but I respect their opinions because they're not above saying that when they're wrong about stuff, got onto this one woman who was teaching about white privilege and slavery, and she said that a student, by eating a peanut butter and, as you Americans call it, jelly, which we call jam, sandwich, was exercising white privilege and should be ashamed of it. And, like, there's just some people who are just, I'm sorry to use this phrase, but they're just talking shit to sound important. Like, this is one of the reasons why I've never been above someone correcting me, why I completely bowed to Ian's nous on this one for the guest choice, because I was just like, okay, it's your call. I don't know your show as well as you do. I'm not saying I'm special. I'm not saying I'm blessed above all others. And this person clearly had never had that come into her mind. So, yeah, like I said, some people can get turned off history, even for the most mundane of subjects, like economics needs a lot of it, when your teacher is a dick.
I mean, certainly. I mean, I think that's why I had such a hard time with math, is like, when I was in high school, math was my most hated subject, and I actually had the same teacher for 2 classes, and he was just the worst kind of person. And like everyone says, oh, I had the worst math teacher. I legitimately forgot to take notes in a class on multiple occasions with him because I could not help but get distracted and daydream about ways to kill him. Like, that's how much that dude pissed me off. But then when I got to college, and I'm still not, like, in love with math or anything, when I got to college, I had a professor that I took for 2 classes as well, and he actually explained it to me in a way that I'd never heard anyone explain mathematics to me. And he explained the reason that you do this shit and why it's actually applicable. He explained the theory behind what you're trying to get out of your results, as opposed to, here's the formula, plug it in, and do it. He actually explained the method behind and why it would work the way it would. And that's...
I had the exact same thing. I had one professor once that did that, and it was my very last math class in college. And it sucks, because then I suddenly realized, oh, no, maybe this is interesting.
Well, hang on. I could have had this the entire time. Fuck you. Fuck every teacher who's just stiffed me out of an interesting class.
My statistics professor was basically Adam West. It was hilarious and awesome. He was funny, though. He actually, and just a side tangent, he was so methodical and taught for so many years that he had notes and points as to when he's going to make a joke. Nice. And it was awesome. Like, it just says, on the schedule, make joke about nuclear clocks.
Oh, God.
Nice.
Now let me just jump in with, since we're just going through side tangents right now. So, like, I was really excited when I heard that McDonald's was doing all-day breakfast.
Me too.
I'm not like a huge McDonald's fan, but you know what I love to death that you can only get at McDonald's breakfast time is a McGriddle. McGriddles are fucking amazing. Pancake witches are a gift from the gods, and I say that as an atheist. So I go to McDonald's today, and I go through the drive-thru and order a McGriddle at 5 in the afternoon because they're serving breakfast all day. They have commercials and banners and billboards about it.
Oh.
You know what they tell me? oh, we don't serve McGriddles this late. We can only do McMuffins. And I was like, fuck you, you motherfucker. You might as well just slap me in the face. I don't want your fucking McMuffin. Your fucking McMuffin can go suck a goddamn dick as far as I'm concerned. I want a goddamn McGriddle. Like, I was so ready to just explode at that person because I was so disappointed. For years I've been waiting for McDonald's to finally break down and do breakfast all day. And they didn't, and they finally do, but they half-assed it, the bastards. So anyway, history.
The moral of the story is don't mess with Ian's McGriddles.
Yeah, motherfucker. You stand between me and a McGriddle, you're losing an arm. And I'm going to put that arm on my McGriddle and eat it. Anyway, if you haven't had a McGriddle, try it. Bacon, egg, and cheese McGriddle. It's fucking amazing.
It's on the to-do list now.
Yeah. Seriously, dude, it's like 2 little tiny pancakes that are soaked in syrup, and then eggs and bacon and cheese sandwich in it.
Now we've started, Steve. We've got crazy old man Ian talking about his food.
Fuck you, bro. Tell me you don't want a McGriddle. Like, I was so excited. I was gonna get McGriddles first, and then once I got tired of just McGriddles on their own, I was gonna go order hamburgers but made with McGriddle buns, and it would have been amazing. And now I can't do that, and I'm so mad. You have no idea how angry I am right now. Like, my whole world, like, it's pretty much over, guys. There's a window right here. I'm going to wrap up the show and just go jump out of it.
See, now I kind of want to get breakfast.
Yeah.
That's right?
After this gets
Help
over,
me,
I'm hitting the fridge and I'm
you are a liar.
nuking myself to curry.
Anyway, so was there anything about history and academia? Because, like, I don't know how we could possibly get back to it by any other logical connection, so I'll just ask, was there anything else anyone wanted to talk about?
Yeah,
I'm pretty tapped out.
I could go for a couple of days longer, but I'm happy to leave it there. I mean, let's face it, we made, like I said before, we made good arguments on both sides, and we narrowed down that it's 3 things. You know, it's the teacher, it's the subject, and it's whether you want to go on the meta level above and actually expand the knowledge of the subject, or whether you just want to know the subject really well.
Or I think the best argument we've come up with is, if you want it to stick, it's good to ground it in something, and history is a great place to find that.
Right.
Absolutely.
Because if it's actually important to know, then there should be a reason historically why it's important anyway.
Yeah.
So let's go ahead and wrap up. How do we want to do this? Steve, do you have the book we talked about yet?
I don't. I ordered it, but it's on back order, so I guess I'll have to wait a little while.
All right, so that's not an option. Ozzy, are you free this time next week?
Don't have a reason not to be.
Okay, can you pick something review topic-wise that we can talk about that has to be obviously history-related?
History-related, I was actually... because I've actually managed to pick up a copy of Arrow Season 3 and watch it all the way through. And that's been something I've been meaning to do on this podcast for a while. But history-wise, as a suggestion, comparing all the radio serial-esque Mystery Men superheroes to more modern 1990s-esque superheroes, with superpowers and that.
Nah, I don't really think that qualifies. Yeah, I don't think that really qualifies.
Yeah. Like I said, it was a suggestion. But
no, like history, like more like biopics or things that are clearly grounded in an era.
Sorry, I'm just looking through some movies just to see if I have anything.
Or wait, we could do the Persepolis movie if we could download that.
Persepolis? No, I've seen that.
Is it in English?
I don't know.
Don't know if I can find it in English, but no, I've seen it. It's a beautiful movie, don't get me wrong. Absolutely worth the time to see.
It's in English subtitles, it looks like. Oh, wait.
Yeah,
holy shit,
it's subtitled, yeah.
It's on YouTube in 3 minutes sections. And it's all in French or something.
If it has subtitles, I'd be okay with it.
There are subtitles. Oh, wait, hold on. Persepolis 2007 English? Let's just skip randomly. God, I love this. For art. Oh, yep. it's in English.
I think I found
Cool.
the exact link you're looking at.
John Stallings'
Yep.
version? Yep. Okay, cool. We'll do the movie then instead of the book.
All right.
Alright, let me add that.
I haven't seen the movie, so that should be exciting, but I imagine it can't be that much different than the book.
Probably not. Okay, cool.
Yeah, we'll do Persepolis. It's the ancient capital of the Persian Empire. If anyone wanted to know why that's the title of the book. Because she's from Iran. And anyway. So yeah, we'll talk about Persepolis. Ozzy, you're welcome to come because I think it's a really interesting
I
look
love
at
Middle
history.
Eastern history. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, everyone. So thank you very much for listening. Until next time, I'm the philosopher.
I'm the politician.
And I'm the guy holding up the table.
And we are your geeky gentlemen. And we will be discussing.